Open up the door, it's Dave!
Who?
Dave! D-A-V-E!
Dave?
Right, man, Dave.
Dave's not here.
I wanted to take a minute and provide a quick update to my last video. That's the one you'll see listed in the card up here, where I talked about charging at 120 volts versus 240 versus using supercharging. And I made a mistake in the video and I wanted to correct for it. I added a little caveat in the video text at the bottom, but I realized that it was actually mistaken and I wanted to correct that here. And what it was talking about the fact that the battery may be impacted if you charge constantly at 120 volts. That's not true. That is incorrect to say that. What does happen if you charge at 120 volts is it puts more strain on the electrical system in the car because it's turning on more and it's running for longer. And it actually may have some impact on the components, though that's maybe a little bit of a stretch. The other thing is you may use a little bit more energy overall as opposed to charging at 240 volts. You know, it may use a couple of kilowatt hours more than it would if you charged at 240. But it's trivial, really. There is no difference between charging at 120 volts and 240 volts. So I wanted to correct the record on that. My mistake, and sorry about that. I try to be honest and give you the best information I can. And sometimes I remembered reading something about that, but the site that I found turns out that it was bogus. So my apologies. Thanks for catching that, anyone who did. I always appreciate getting feedback from people. Now, a couple other things I just wanted to talk about for a minute. One of the things someone asked me was, how did I wire my house? And I have a 50 amp breaker in my junction box. So it's 50 amps that I can pull off of it. So when I'm charging at 32, it really shouldn't be a big deal because it can handle 50 amps. And at 240 volts, it shouldn't be an issue. The other question was, what was the size gauge wire I used? Well, I used the 6 gauge wire, 4 different wires. So I have my black, my red, my white, and my green. And it's wired up in a way that will actually allow me to go in there. Now, the 6 gauge is a pretty heavy wire, as you can probably see here. And so that's how I did that. Just so you have some context on what I did with my house and how I wired it. Now, I know I told you I was having some problems with the circuit breaker itself, and it kept warming up. And I appreciate some of the feedback I got about that. And I actually went ahead and changed the actual breaker from a 150 amp breaker to a different one. And that seems to have solved the problem. So thank you for that suggestion. That was kind of in the back of my mind. That was one of the things I was thinking I might want to do, but I hadn't gotten to yet. So now that I've done it, it seems to have solved the problem. So I think that was a great idea. Thank you. Now, one other thing I wanted to talk about on this video was someone mentioned charging plug-in electric hybrids. And I have to say that in the past, I was kind of poo-pooing the whole idea of plug-in electric hybrids. They seemed like they were kind of a hack. And there was a specific reason for that. It's because car companies were just car companies, and they were taking their simple catalytic converter engine, nothing simple about it anymore, and they were adding in a second motor component where they had a battery and a battery pack and a motor and the other things, and they had to connect the two together. And the early incarnations of this, it was a hack. It really didn't provide much value. It was one of those things that car companies did to promote a higher MPG, and that was the whole point of it. It wasn't really about environmental friendliness. It wasn't really about getting further with your car. It was just trying to sell an idea that you could get higher miles per gallon, which is great. It has a purpose. But the original cars really didn't do much. They didn't use the technology to their advantage. They didn't really think it through. They were just doing something that was kind of a hack. But I have to say that over time, they've all kind of figured it out. They make these plug-in electric hybrids now that are much more efficient. It used to be that these cars, they would just use the battery sort of as an extension. Now you can actually plug it in and get a slightly bigger battery pack inside your car and do more with the car. And I think that is a tremendous benefit. I think there is something to be said for how that worked out and the fact that there's something better going on there. And now they're figuring out how to advertise those cars too, that it's an electric car when you want it to be. And it's a gas car when you want to go on longer trips. So that way you're not stuck with the limitations that come along with a traditional electric car, one that's not a Tesla especially. So it's kind of a nice addition to it. And I actually kind of like some of these plug-in electric hybrids. And I like some of the advertising they're doing because they're hitting people right in the right spot there, that sweet spot where they say, you know, it's both. You're getting the best of both worlds where you can actually go electric if you want to. And it's sort of that easing into the electric market as opposed to just jumping in like with a Tesla or a Kia EV6 or Volkswagen ID series and whatever. Those cars all have their purpose and they're great. But I think that getting people more engaged with the idea of using an electric car and having the ability to not have to stop and charge is really huge, at least in the short term here, because we can't get this charging network built out. So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about. Just figured I'd give you a quick update and talk about plug-in electric hybrids because someone asked me the question about that. So there's some great cars out there. Maybe on a future video, I'll go through and actually review some of those and talk about some of the cars, and maybe I'll go look at a few myself. Anyway, have a great day, and thanks very much for tuning in.
What's your point, David?